The pattern repeats with such uncanny consistency that one cannot help but wonder if there exists an invisible law governing the rise and fall of empires. From the fertile banks of the Nile to the 7 hills of Rome, from the forbidden city to the palaces of Persepolis, history's greatest powers have followed remarkably similar trajectories despite being separated by vast distances and centuries of time. In 332 BCE, as Alexander the Great stood victorious in Egypt, the priests at the oracle of Siwa declared him the son of Amun, divine ruler and rightful pharaoh. This moment, when a Macedonian king adopted the symbols and legitimacy of an ancient Egyptian tradition, perfectly illustrates the first stage in our recurring pattern, the consolidation of power through cultural amalgamation. All great empires begin not merely through conquest, but through synthesis, observed Professor Isaiah Lowenstein of Oxford University. They absorb and adapt the strengths of those they conquer. This pattern of growth, expansion, stability, decadence, and decline appears with such regularity throughout history that we must ask, is this trajectory inevitable? More importantly, what can we learn from these recurring cycles? The Roman Empire provides perhaps our most detailed case study. In 27 BCE, Octavian, having defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, was granted the title of Augustus by the Senate. This marked the official end of the Roman Republic and the beginning of the Pax Romana, a period of relative peace and stability that would last nearly 2 centuries. The early Roman Empire demonstrates the second stage in our pattern, systematic organization and institutional development. Augustus created a professional standing army, established a courier system, developed a sophisticated civil service, standardized taxation, and initiated massive public works projects. These innovations created the infrastructure necessary for administering territories spanning 3 continents. Marcus Fortunato, a senator during the Flavian dynasty, wrote in 79 CE, "Rome rules not merely through fear of her legions, but through the order she brings. Where we build roads, aqueducts, and forums, barbarity retreats. Where our laws prevail, justice follows." Indeed, all successful empires develop systems of governance that transcend the capabilities of any single ruler. The Persian Empire under Darius I, 522 to 486 BCE, divided its vast territory into satrapies with standardized systems of taxation and infrastructure. The Tang dynasty, 618 to 907 CE, implemented the world's first comprehensive civil service examination system to recruit talented administrators regardless of family background. The British Empire established civil service colleges and administrative procedures that could be replicated from India to Canada. This institutional phase invariably leads to a golden age, the third stage in our pattern. For Rome, this arrived during the reign of the 5 good emperors, 96 to 180 CE. For Persia, under Cyrus and Darius. For China, during the Tang and early Song dynasties. These periods share common characteristics: territorial stability, economic prosperity, artistic flourishing, and technological innovation. During these golden ages, empires typically demonstrate remarkable religious and cultural tolerance. Cyrus the Great not only permitted the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple in 539 BCE but subsidized the construction. The Mongol Empire under Genghis Khan and his immediate successors allowed complete religious freedom across their domains in the 13th century. The Ottoman Empire's millet system permitted religious minorities to maintain their own legal courts and community governance. Imperial tolerance was not merely idealistic but pragmatic, explains Dr. Mariah Fullerton, historian at Cambridge University. Multicultural empires required multicultural policies to function effectively. Persecution was expensive and counterproductive. This tolerance facilitated unprecedented commercial networks. The Silk Road connecting China to the Mediterranean world did not merely transport luxury goods but also technologies, religions, and ideas. Paper, invented in China around 105 CE, reached Baghdad by 793 CE and Spain by the 11th century. The Islamic Golden Age, 8th to 14th centuries, preserved and expanded upon Greek knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. Yet as predictably as empires rise, they also decline, leading to the 4th stage in our pattern, institutional calcification and moral decay. In 180 CE, The death of Marcus Aurelius brought his son Commodus to power. The new emperor had little interest in administration and preferred to perform as a gladiator in the arena while court officials effectively ran the empire. This began a period of imperial instability that would eventually contribute to Rome's fragmentation. This pattern of decay typically includes several elements: increasing financial strain from maintaining extensive borders, growing wealth inequality, bloated bureaucracies, declining civic virtue among elites, and military overextension. The Spanish Habsburg Empire provides another instructive example. By the late 16th century, Spain controlled territories across Europe, the Americas, and the Pacific. Yet this global empire was already showing signs of strain. Despite the influx of American silver, Spain declared bankruptcy in 1557, 1575, 1596, 1607, 1627, 1647, and 1653. The costs of maintaining military supremacy had outpaced the empire's economic base. By the fifth stage, imperial overreach, the pattern becomes virtually irreversible. The British Empire in the early 20th century controlled approximately 1/4 of the world's land surface and population. Yet World War I demonstrated the unsustainable costs of global dominance. By 1947, when India gained independence, it was clear that the age of European empires was ending. What makes this pattern so persistent? The answer lies partly in human psychology and partly in the mechanics of complex systems. Power has a paradoxical effect on human cognition, notes psychologist Dr. Emmanuel Lombardi. The very success that builds empires creates the conditions for overconfidence. Leaders begin to believe their own myths of invincibility. This psychological blindness manifests in specific policy choices. Successful empires initially make pragmatic decisions based on realistic assessments of threats and opportunities. As they grow more powerful, decision-making becomes increasingly ideological and divorced from ground realities. The Athenian expedition against Syracuse in 415 to 413 BCE exemplifies this pattern. At the height of its power, democratic Athens launched an ambitious campaign to conquer Sicily. Thucydides records that the respected general Nicias warned against this overreach, but the assembly, intoxicated by recent successes, voted for war anyway. The result was catastrophic defeat, with nearly the entire Athenian fleet destroyed and thousands of citizens enslaved. Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, 527 to 565 CE, similarly overextended his empire by attempting to reconquer the Western Roman territories. While initially successful, these campaigns depleted the treasury and left the empire vulnerable to new threats from the east. By 568 CE, much of Italy had been lost to the Lombards. Economic factors also drive this recurring pattern. All empires eventually face diminishing returns on conquest. The early phases of imperial expansion often target wealthy, accessible regions. Rome's conquest of Greece, Egypt, and Asia Minor brought enormous wealth. Similarly, the Spanish conquest of Mesoamerican and Andean civilizations delivered unprecedented treasure. But subsequent expansions typically yield less valuable territory while imposing greater administrative costs. Monetary systems follow their own pattern within imperial cycles. In Rome, a currency that was 95% silver under Augustus had been debased to less than 5% silver by the 3rd century CE. The resulting inflation undermined military salaries and civil administration. We see similar patterns of debasement in Chinese paper money during the Yuan dynasty and in the Ottoman arspar during the empire's long decline. Military evolution represents another consistent element. Rising empires typically innovate in military organization, tactics, and technology. The Macedonian phalanx under Philip II and Alexander, the Roman Manipular Legion, the Mongol cavalry tactics, and the British naval strategies under Nelson all represented revolutionary approaches that overcame existing military systems. Yet success breeds complacency. By the late Roman period, the legions had abandoned many of the disciplinary practices and tactical innovations that had made them formidable. Similarly, Ottoman military technology, once the most advanced in the world, fell behind European developments by the 17th century. The Chinese fleet, which had conducted impressive expeditions under Admiral Zheng He (1405 to 1433), was later dismantled by imperial decree, leaving China vulnerable to European maritime power in the 19th century. Perhaps most interesting is how imperial cycles affect social mobility. Rising empires typically create unprecedented opportunities. Common soldiers could rise to become emperors in Rome's early centuries. The Tang civil service examinations allowed farmers' sons to become high officials. The Ottoman devshirme system permitted Christian boys to rise to the highest positions of state, including that of Grand Vizier. Yet as empires mature, these channels of advancement tend to narrow. Positions become hereditary, examinations become corrupted, and social stratification increases. This calcification reduces both talent utilization and social cohesion, further accelerating decline. The Habsburg Empire under Charles V, ruled 1519 to 1556, illustrates how these factors converge. Charles inherited the greatest territorial assemblage in European history, including Spain, the Low Countries, parts of Italy, and the Habsburg lands in Central Europe, plus Spain's growing American empire. Yet this vast inheritance proved ungovernable. Religious division, fiscal strain, and overextension eventually forced Charles to abdicate, dividing his realms between his brother and son. No empire falls because of a single battle or policy mistake, observes military historian Colonel Isaac Lawford. They collapse when multiple systems fail simultaneously, when financial strain meets military challenge meets internal division meets environmental pressure. Indeed, environmental factors often provide the final push in imperial decline. The Mayan civilization collapsed partly due to prolonged drought around 900 CE. The Mongol conquest of China was facilitated by the weakening of Song dynasty defenses during a period of unusual cold and crop failures. The Ottoman-Habsburg Wars coincided with the Little Ice Age, which strained agricultural production across Eurasia. Most significantly, imperial elites typically remain blind to these challenges until too late. Edward Gibbon, in his monumental The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, published 1776 to 1789, observed that Rome's decay occurred while the Roman world was still adorned with the most magnificent symbols of prosperity and power. What makes this pattern relevant today? The dynamics that governed ancient empires have not disappeared from human affairs. Modern nations and international systems exhibit many of the same tendencies toward overextension, institutional calcification, and elite detachment. Consider how the United States responded to the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. As the sole remaining superpower, America experienced a unipolar moment similar to Rome after defeating Carthage. This period saw military interventions across multiple continents, financial deregulation, growing wealth inequality, and increased political polarization, elements remarkably consistent with historical imperial patterns. Similarly, China's extraordinary economic rise since 1978 has followed many patterns seen in ascending empires: infrastructure development, institutional innovation, technological advancement, and cultural revival. Yet China also faces challenges familiar from imperial histories: demographic decline, environmental degradation, corruption, and the narrowing of paths to advancement. The European Union represents a novel approach to transcending imperial cycles. By creating institutions that distribute power rather than concentrate it, the EU has attempted to gain imperial-scale advantages, integrated markets, shared defense, cultural exchange, while avoiding imperial-scale vulnerabilities. Whether this experiment succeeds remains to be seen. International corporations, too, follow patterns reminiscent of historical empires. They expand across borders, develop complex administrative systems, create distinct cultures, and eventually struggle with bureaucratic calcification. The average lifespan of Fortune 500 companies has declined from 75 years in the 1950s to less than 15 years today, suggesting that organizational decline may be accelerating in the digital age. What can leaders learn from these recurring patterns? First, success contains the seeds of future failure. The very specialization that creates efficiency in stable conditions becomes vulnerability when conditions change. The Roman legions, Ottoman janissaries, and Spanish tercios all transformed from revolutionary forces to reactionary institutions. Second, diversity and inclusion correlate strongly with imperial ascendance, while homogenization and exclusion signal decline. At their peaks, Rome, Tang China, the Abbasid Caliphate, and the British Empire all incorporated talent regardless of origin. Their decline phases saw increasing ethnic chauvinism and narrowing opportunity. Third, financial discipline matters enormously. No empire has survived persistent fiscal irresponsibility. The transition from productive investment to consumption and debt invariably accelerates decline. This pattern appears with remarkable consistency from ancient Rome to Habsburg Spain to the Soviet Union. Fourth, environmental sustainability underpins everything else. Empires that degraded their resource base, through deforestation, soil exhaustion, water depletion, or climatic change, invariably weakened themselves before external enemies delivered the final blow. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the psychology of leadership proves decisive. Humble, pragmatic leadership characterizes rising empires. Ideological rigidity and self-glorification mark declining ones. Augustus maintained republican facades despite holding absolute power. Diocletian, 284 to 305 CE, by contrast, required subjects to prostrate themselves before him as a divine being, even as the empire crumbled around him. The future need not recapitulate the past. By understanding these recurring patterns, modern leaders and citizens can potentially break the cycle. Institutional adaptability, sustainable resource management, social mobility, and pragmatic decision-making offer pathways to extended prosperity rather than precipitous decline. The Athenian statesman Pericles, speaking in 431 BCE, reminded his fellow citizens, "What made Athens great was not the magnificence of our buildings or the glory of our military victories, but the character of our people." This wisdom applies equally to modern nations and organizations. Perhaps the most important lesson is that no power remains dominant forever. The recognition of impermanence may itself be the greatest wisdom history offers, and the one most frequently ignored. For as Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations around 170 CE, look back over the past, with its changing empires that rose and fell, and you can foresee the future too. The pattern continues, but understanding it offers the possibility, however slight, of transcending it.